Vayigash. Okay, so let's start. This Torah portion is the Torah portion of Vayigash, and the Torah portion of Vayigash is definitely one of the most poignant and, I would say, evocative parshiot in the entire Torah, because it is in this week's Torah portion that Joseph confronts or meets his brothers and reveals himself to his brothers. And there's a lot of tension that leads up to this encounter. And when they do finally meet, it is a tremendous climax, and it's very powerful. And it's really the stuff that the best narratives are made of. So truly, the story of Joseph is one of the most evocative stories that we have in the Torah, and probably very few stories match the drama. I mean, how many people can say that they were sold into slavery by their own brother, by their own sibling, and then they end up being in jail for 10 or 12 years, and then they end up being a ruler of a country that is one of the greatest superpowers of the region, and then the brothers have to come and meet him disguised as he is, as a superpower. So there's very few stories that match the drama of Yosef. But beneath the drama of Yosef, of course, as we know in all of the Torah teachings, it's not only to tell you exciting stories, but it is to shed light on important teachings for all our lives. And this story is no exception. Now, there's so much that can be cultivated from the story of Joseph and his brothers. And there's so many layers. Today, I want to focus on the concept of when someone crosses the line and there's betrayal and there's hurt and there's pain. How do we walk back from that? How do we gain forgiveness, and what can we learn from Yosef in our own lives? Now, I have addressed this from a different perspective on different occasions. And today I come from a different perspective, which I'm going to bring together partially just the pshat, the plain meaning of the text, and also I'm going to bring into the discussion and to the conversation, I'm going to bring in as well some beautiful mystical teachings that are very practical, okay? Because sometimes mystical teachings tend to be esoteric, but here the mystical teachings really go into the realm of the practical. And I hope you will be as inspired as I was reading this. Now let's go into the narrative first. We have this incredible sight. What is this in a nutshell? What happened with Joseph and his brothers? They come down to Egypt, only 10 of them, right? Benjamin stays back because the father's very worried about Benjamin. The father Jacob is holding on to Benjamin. Benjamin is the apple of his eye. He's all he has left of Rachel. So the 10 brothers go down to Egypt. Joseph sees to it that he has spies along the border crossings to note if there's any Israelites that come in, they should be followed and brought in. And so Joseph brings his brothers in. He has this whole story where he pretends to know who they are. And he says to them, ultimately, that, you have to bring back your brother. They are very concerned. They don't want to bring back the brother. They convince Jacob that this is the only way they're going to get the food that they need from Egypt. And so they reluctantly bring back their brother. And then what happens when they bring back their brother? Joseph plants, when he has the servants plant, his divining cup, his silver divining cup in the bag of Benjamin, essentially framing Benjamin as a thief. And they are all hauled back to the palace. And Joseph makes a very small suggestion. Listen, guys, I have nothing against you. It's just Benjamin. Benjamin has to be my slave in return for having stolen. And here we have the confrontation where Judah, who was the one who guaranteed the return of Benjamin, stands up and confronts Joseph. And the words of the parsha as they open up is Vayigash elav Yehuda, and Yehuda approached him. This is the opening words of the parsha, Vayigash elav Yehuda, and so the name of the Torah portion is Vayigash, and he approached. And in the approaching, the fact that he approached, our sages tell us there's a tremendous amount of chutzpah, there's a tremendous amount of courage, because what he essentially was doing, Yehuda, that is, when he approached Yosef, was that he was getting into Yosef's space. When the Torah tells us that he approached Yosef, it wasn't just that he approached Yosef, but he was getting into his, what we call in halacha, the dalet amos, the 4 cubits of personal space. And we all know when we speak to someone that we reserve a certain amount of space between us and a person. Now, if it's a person of great power, let's say a queen, the Queen of England, a prime minister, a president, there's more space between us and that person. If it's a colleague, we get closer. If it's someone who we're very intimate, the person comes into our personal space and is welcome. But if somebody comes into our personal space and that person is not someone that we know, or worse, is someone who doesn't belong in our personal space, it's extremely threatening. And so our sages tell us that indeed Yehuda, by the words that the Torah uses, Vayigash, that he approached him, that he became close to Joseph, he became too close to Joseph. He got into Joseph's face, and in a sense, he was threatening Joseph with his body language. Even though his words do not betray that, his actions, according to our sages, was more courageous than his words. But he definitely pushes back, and he refuses to allow Benjamin to be taken as a slave. And he says to Joseph, don't take Benjamin as a slave. If you need a slave, take me. I'm responsible for this. And I'm a better slave. I'm stronger. I'm more capable. Leave this boy alone. And if you don't, if you're going to take him, you're going to destroy my father. You're going to kill my father. You're going to destroy our family. You're going to put my father into his grave. And he speaks with a tremendous amount of emotion and force. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go straight into the verse, because the narrative is so powerful. And then we're going to analyze it from the perspective of Pshat, very simple interpretation of the verse. And then we're going to go into some esoteric teachings as well that teach us all about what happens here with Yosef and what we can glean in our own lives for people who betray us. Now, before we get into the text, I just want you to imagine any betrayal that you may have had in your life. And everyone, if you live long enough, someone's going to disappoint you. Someone's going to betray you. Someone who you thought your friend is going to make you sad. But nothing, I think that most of us, anyway, I think for everyone, nothing that most of us have experienced in life can really come up to the betrayal that Yosef had. Yosef was not betrayed by just anybody, but by his brothers. Not just betrayed in the sense that they, kicked him out of the business, or they made a deal behind his back, or they did something that was not in his best interest, but they actually put him in a pit and sold him into slavery. And told his father that he was dead. This takes the cake. So with that background, let's get into the verse of this week's Torah portion, and let's get into the actual reading. And then we're going to go into the teachings that are really very rich and very beautiful when it comes to the story of Joseph and his brothers. So we open up to actually the first portion. First words, the opening words of the Torah portion, Vayigash elav Yehuda vayomer. And Yehuda approached him and he said, Bi adaini, please my master, Yudaber nar avdecha ba'azne adaini, may your servant, meaning Judah, speak in the eyes of your master. Ba'al yichar abcha ba'avdecha, and please don't get angry at me. Ki kamaycha kepare, because you are just like Pharaoh. In other words, you are up there. Now, the commentators say Ki kamaycha kepare has an under meaning, just like we are not afraid of Pharaoh, we're not afraid of you. That's the under meaning. And then he goes on to say the whole story. Adaini sha'alas abdecha lemer hayesh lachem ach avarach. You asked us if we have a brother or a father. We told you that we have an old father, and a child born of old age. Katan, the youngest one, the achiv mace, and his brother died. And he was the only one left to his mother, of his mother's children. And his father loves him. And you said to your servant, bring him down so I could set my eyes on him. And we said to our master, this boy can't leave his father. If he leaves his father, and he will die. But you told your servants, if you do not bring down your little brother, like to Panai, you will not be able to come down here again. But when we went up back to our father, and we told him the entire story of your master. And our father said, go back and get some more food. We can only go back with their youngest son with us. We cannot go back to see the face of this man unless we have our younger brother. You know that my preferred wife, had only 2 children. And one of them left me. And I said, certainly he has been devoured by wild animals. And I've never seen him since. Obviously, they're talking about Yosef. And if you take this young child from me, and some kind of accident will befall him, and you are just going to send me straight to my grave. And now, if we go back to our father, and this young lad is not with us, in other words, Benjamin is not with us, it's going to be the end. His soul is attached to his soul. And by the way, this word, and his soul is attached to his soul, becomes a poetic phrase that is used in rabbinic writings and the Torah lore. When someone wants to say that someone is so intertwined, he's so connected to someone, they say v'nafshay kishura b'nafshay. Or if you say that my soul is intertwined with yours, you say v'nafshi kishura b'nafshi. My soul is attached to his soul. So he's saying, listen, my father's soul is attached to this kid. He doesn't come back. My father is dead. And so we continue. Vahaya ki ra'isai, and then it will be if my father sees ke'ein hanar, that this young lad is not with us, but he will die. Vaharidai abdacha as sevas abdacha b'yavej ela, you're going to send my father to his death in grief. And then he goes on and he says this, I am standing up. If you're wondering why I'm doing the vow, why I'm speaking for everyone, ki abdacha arav esanar, because your servant, in other words, being me, I, Judah, I have promised my father that I will under no circumstances come back without him. I promise my father, Lamar, if I don't bring him back, you can hold it against me my whole life. In other words, I am his guarantor. I will not leave here under any circumstances without my brother. I am sorry. Va'ata, he says, he says, look, you want someone to pay the price for this? Take me, take Judah. I, Judah, will come in the place of my brother. Put me as your slave. I am better than him. Make me your servant. Vahanar Ya'el imechav, and let my brother go back up to his father with the best of the brothers. And then he ends off with this poignant phrase. He says, Ki eich ele el avi, because how in the world can I go up to my father? Vahanar einenu iti, and this land is not with me. Pen ere b'ra, how can I see the evil asher yimtza is avi, that will befall my father? So he has this very emotional plea to Joseph. And at this point, Joseph breaks. Seemingly, he's very emotional, but something has happened in the narrative that actually makes Joseph change his mind. And that is the subject of our discussion. But I want to go into this beautiful breaking point. And the Torah tells us, "V'lo yachal Yosef lihistapek," and Yosef could not stand it. L'chol hanitzavim alav, that everyone was standing, that there were people around. He could not stand what was about to happen, that his brother should not be humiliated in the face of what he's going to tell them now. He just couldn't bear that his brother should be ashamed. Vayikra, and he called out, Haitzia kol ish me'alai, send every man away from me. In other words, every courtier, every servant, every person working in the palace who was standing in service when they had this encounter was sent away. And the Torah tells us, V'loi amad ish, and not one person was standing there when Yosef revealed himself to his brothers. So Yosef, just first hint right here, when he reveals himself to his brothers, what's the first thing he does? What's the first thing he does before he reveals himself to his brothers? Ladies, what does he do? He makes sure that
they will not, that nobody will see this.
Yes.
So that the brothers will not be ashamed of what they did.
Yes, he makes sure that they should not be ashamed in front of others. And what does he do as soon as everyone leaves the room? He starts crying so loudly. He wept so loud that everyone around him heard him crying. They didn't know why. He started to bawl his eyeballs out. Imagine this emotional, emotional presentation that the Torah is telling us, the details of the presentation. Yosef is overcome with emotion. And this is what he says. Vayomer Yosef, and Yosef says to his brothers, Elochiv, to his brothers, Ani Yosef, I am Yosef. Ha'od Avichai, is my father still alive? And his brothers simply could not answer the question. Because they were shocked in front of him. They could not believe what they were seeing. This viceroy, dressed up like an Egyptian, with the whole headgear, talking Egyptian to them, was his brother Yosef that they threw into a pit, that they sold into slavery. So it's very clear that the brothers were just shocked and they were silenced. And Yosef says the following, Vayomer Yosef el achiv, Yosef says to his brother, Geshuna Elai, please come closer to me. Don't stand so far away. Vayigashu Vayomer, and they come closer and he says to them again, Ani Yosef achichem, I am Yosef, your brother. Asher mechartem I see Mitzrayim, remember you sold me to Egypt? Yeah, I'm that one. Va'ata, and now, al tiatzvu, don't be sad. Va'al yichar beinechem, and don't let it trouble you in your eyes. And also don't get angry at each other, says the commentaries. Ki mechartem I see, that you sold me. Why? Because actually it was God who sent me. You thought you were throwing me in the pit, but God sent me here. God sent me here so that I could provide food for our family. Because it's already 2 years that the famine is quite harsh. And we procrastinate that there'll be another 5 years that we will not be able to plow or to harvest. God sent me before you came to make you a remnant in this land, and to be able to deliver you. Now, this is the opening words. He says, don't get angry. I'm not angry at you. Don't be upset. And I saw a beautiful commentary, go back a few verses, where Yosef says, here, Ani Yosef achichem asher mechartem oisi b'Mitzrayim. It's a beautiful teaching that the Rebbe brought down once in a Farbrengen, quoting, I think, the Sfas Emes, another great sage. And he says like this, Vayomer Ani Yosef, I am Yosef, your brother. Why am I here? Why am I who I am today? I'm only here today, asher mechartem oisi b'Mitzrayim, because you sold me to Egypt. Now, the word asher in Hebrew takes on, it's like a camelon. It takes on different meanings. Sometimes asher means because, sometimes asher means that, and sometimes asher means who. So in this case, in the normative reading of the passage, it is, I am Yosef, your brother, who you sold into slavery. But the commentators here, and this, especially this commentary from the Sfas Emes, I believe, says, I am Yosef, your brother. I am now the viceroy of Egypt, asher mechartem oisi, because you sold me into Egypt. That's why I was able to become the viceroy. It's only because of that. So don't feel bad. It was all meant to be. And then also in the Hebrew, asher has the same etymology as asher, to be joyful. So he says, be joyful that you sold me to Egypt. I'm joyful because I see this as part of a divine plan. So suffice it is to say that what we see here is an extraordinary response to someone who has been thrown in a pit and sold into slavery. When his brothers are confronted by Yosef, they are so petrified, they're so shocked, and they expect fully that they're done for. But instead, not only does Joseph say to them, don't worry, but Joseph says to them, you don't have to feel bad for what you did. It was part of a divine plan. It was meant to be, and it's all okay. So what we see from Joseph, and as I mentioned many times in our Torah class, one of the themes that run through the Torah book of Bereshit is Maaseh Avot Siman Labanim, that the actions of our forefathers can be seen as a teaching for their children, and not only as a teaching for the children, but as an empowerment for the children. And so here we have this idea that Yosef, who was so poorly treated, doesn't see the poor treatment as something that was negative, but rather it was something that was meant to be, even though at the time that they did so, they did not mean it for his good. Now, going back, the question is, okay, so if Joseph is so kind, and if Joseph is so nice, why did he make his brothers go through this whole circus of bringing them in and divining and pretending, and then sending them away with a lot of money and food, and then insisting that Benjamin comes back, and then planting the cup in Benjamin's bag and all this? Why did if he was so nice, why did he go through all of that? And so the plain, simple answer is this: that Joseph does something for the brothers, not for his sake, not for revenge, but for their sake. And what is it that he does? He puts them through the process of tshuva. Okay, what's the process of tshuva? It's very interesting. If you look at what goes on here, you see that Joseph makes his brothers walk the same path that they had with him and make different decisions. So, for example, okay, when the brothers first come, right? What do you have? You have the brothers come in, and the brothers are sent back, but first Simon is held, right? He's held there, and then what do? They have to go back and bring Benjamin. And then when they refuse to bring Benjamin, they're essentially reenacting Joseph's footsteps, and they're not allowing Benjamin to be sold to become a slave, which is the exact opposite of what they did to Joseph. Because Joseph was the beloved brother, the beloved son of Rachel, they threw Joseph in the pit. And here, the other beloved son of Rachel is actually protected. And not only that, but Judah, who is the one that threw Joseph in the pit, puts his life up puts his life up to defend Benjamin. And so you have the story in reverse, and so you have the opportunity for tshuva. Now, I saw a beautiful teaching from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and he says as follows. He says that if you look at the pshat, if you look at the meaning of the Torah, the plain meaning of the Torah, you'll see that from the very beginning of the book of Bereshit, this is the first time we have the concept of forgiveness, right? Let's talk about Bereshit. So if you look at Bereshit, at the very beginning of Bereshit, you have Adam and Chava, they eat from the tree, they get punished, they're not forgiven. Then you have two brothers that fight with each other, Cain and Abel. What happens? How does that end up? It ends up in, anyone?
They kill.
They kill each other. One kills the other. You have
murder.
You have murder of you have fratricide. First murder in the Torah happens to be brothers. Then you go to the great stories that we have of the story of Noah. His son Shem sins, so the father curses him, doesn't forgive him. Go down to, of course, to go to Abraham. Abraham has two children. They do not see eye to eye. They're not reconciled. What happens to Ishmael? He gets sent away.
Thrown out.
Yes, he doesn't become part of the family. He gets sent away. Then you have Yitzchak's two children. Yitzchak has two children, Yaakov and Esav. What happens with Yaakov and Esav? They don't kill each other. They're much better. But really, what happens with Yaakov is that Yaakov appeases Esav. We learned this a few weeks ago. There's a tremendous show that Yaakov makes when he meets Esav. He bows down to him 7 times. He uses the language, my master, my master, my master, when he refers to Esav, and your servant, your servant, your servant, when he refers to Jacob. So there's an appeasement. The problem doesn't go away. The problem is not solved. The problem is just deferred to another time. In other words, right now, we're not going to deal with this. We're going to manage the conflict, i.e., we're going to go our own ways in peace, but not with forgiveness. I don't forgive you, but I will let it go. And that's very different than forgiveness. Letting something go is not forgiving. Letting something go means that whatever it is that is taking your anger and your hurt is just too much emotional capital. So you let it go. Okay, I let it go. And I saw a beautiful vart from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who says that he was a student of Greek philosophy and of civilizations. He was a philosopher also. He says that you do not find the concept of forgiveness before Torah. Before this episode of Joseph, you do not find the concept of forgiveness. So in ancient civilization, there wasn't an idea of forgiveness. What was there? There was often appeasement. So that if you hurt me, or if you did something wrong, I would have to either explain myself, say, it wasn't me, I couldn't help it. If you look at me in the sum total of who I am, that's not who I am. Out of balance, so then out of the balance of who I am, let it be. But there's no concept of forgiveness. What we have is a concept of appeasement, similar to the concept that we have with Jacob. Jacob, we have appeasement. Jacob brings presents to his brothers. So you do have this idea of appeasement, of you're going to humiliate yourself to another person. So often in ancient culture, the way people dealt with a conflict was that they would become subjugated to the person who they humiliated or who they hurt, and say, you know what, they get absolution, but they don't get forgiveness. In other words, I'll let it go. And often, Rabbi Sachs says what would happen would be that the people would subjugate themselves in such a way they humiliate themselves in order to get appeasement, and the humiliation was a kind of a blood payment to say, okay, Now that you humiliated yourself to me, my honor is restored, my dignity is restored, and therefore, you could keep going on with me. And by the way, if you look at modern history, so we find with gangs in, North American gangs, often when there's a conflict and someone is crossed, if someone crosses the line, they have to eat dirt. They have to eat dirt in order to become back in the good graces. And if they do something that humiliates the doer so badly that now the dignity of the person who was crossed is restored. So, okay, now you can go back, you're in my good graces, but I've never really forgiven you. What I've done is I've made yourself abase yourself. I've made you lower yourself, eat the dirt in front of my face and say, okay, you ate the dirt, okay, you paid your dues. Paying your dues is not forgiveness. I'm going to make you pay for it, but it's not forgiveness. Forgiveness means, in the Torah sense of the word, true forgiveness means that the person comes back into your being or into your presence or into your relationship the same as they were before. In other words, you love them the same way. It's not just about letting go, it's about forgiving. It's a very difficult thing to achieve. Now, what Yosef does is, when he is cruel to his brothers, so to speak, he is actually, what he's doing actually is that he is giving them the exercise so that they can do tshuva, so that he could full-heartedly forgive them. And he forgives them for the first time. And so what we have here is a very interesting look at the way people deal with sin and forgiveness. Again, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs talks about the difference between guilt and shame. He says as follows, that guilt is something that is connected to your act. You feel guilty, or you are guilty for having done something negative. And that guilt can be fixed through tshuva, okay? Shame is something that attaches itself to the person, not to the act. And I found this teaching very interesting because in Pirkei Avot, there is a teaching that says, "Va'al tihi rasha lifnei atzmacha." Don't be evil in your own eyes, okay? And in the Tanya, the magnum opus of the first Chabad Rebbe, which is kind of the Bible of Chabad thought, the Alter Rebbe in his magnum opus, the Tanya, he goes into great detail about this idea of Va'al tihi rasha lifnei atzmacha. Do not be a sinner in your own eyes. What does this mean? What does it mean not to be a sinner in your own eyes? If you've done a sin, aren't you a sinner? What does it mean that you're not a sinner in your own eyes? Anybody? What does it mean that you're not a sinner in your own eyes?
The sinner, they made it, they internalized it. So if you've done an act, a sin of act, is outside of you, but the sinner is the person.
Right. So the difference between the sin and the sinner. So in the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe underlines this and says that a person has to separate the sin from themselves. That means to say that a sin can be committed by me. I can do a wrongdoing, but that sin is not me. Now, why is it bad to say that a sin is me? Yeah, I'm a sinner. Why is it bad to say that the sin is me? Why is it bad to say that I am the sin? Anyone? You can unmute yourself.
It would put you in great despair.
Yes, thank you. It would put you into great despair. And not only would it put you into great despair, there's something even worse that can happen. That if a person sees himself as a sinner, what do they say to themselves? Who am I fooling? I'm a sinner. So I sin. And then what it does is
So then I can do it again.
But then I could do it again.
Because I'm
and
bad.
then
I'm
bad.
bad.
I'm bad and I could do it again.
And-
Yes. This is who I am.
This
No.
is me.
Take it or leave it. I'm a bad person. You know what? And this gives me permission to be rude, aggressive, angry,
Right.
because I'm bad. And you know what? I'm owning it. I'm owning my badness. So the Alter Rebbe in the Tanya talks about, because the Tanya is really a compendium to how to become a better person and a better Jew and a more refined person and closer to your divine purpose. He says this is dangerous for two reasons, because on the one hand, it could depress a person, and the person goes into an abyss and says, look, who am I kidding? This is who I am. I've done this so many times. This is who I am. I can't get out of this. On the other hand, it could turn a person to becoming even more evil, if I could use that word, more negative in their actions, because they already write themselves off. So going back to this idea of shame and guilt. So in ancient civilization, there was this notion of shame. You know, we have Cain, right? Cain bore the mark of shame. He killed someone, he had to walk around with the mark on his forehead. In other words, I am a murderer and never shall I be forgiven. Now, murder is one arena that is very hard to achieve forgiveness. So it's probably not the best example, because murder is the capital sin that only the end of life can bring redemption. Murder, I'm not talking about killing, murder. But everything else, almost all other sins, in ancient civilization, you became what you did. So therefore, if you did something wrong, it was a shame to you, not only to you often, but also to your entire family, to your children and your children's children. And so you have feuds, for example, that last, blood feuds, which, by the way, we still see this in certain parts of the world, blood feuds that go on from generation to generation to generation, because the mark of shame of the act that was done can never be taken away. And so it never gets forgiven. Here we have from Yosef an idea that, no, actually forgiveness can be achieved. And if you look into the into Maimonides talks about in his laws of forgiveness, in his epic Mishnah Torah. Maimonides says, and I'm just going to bring you the opening words of Maimonides' Mishnah Torah. Okay, find this. In the opening words of Maimonides' Mishnah Torah, Maimonides says very simply these words: who has reached tshuva, who has reached tshuva, a person who confronts the same situation in which he sinned, when he has the potential to commit the sin again, and nevertheless abstains and does not commit it, because of tshuva alone, or not because of fear of lack of strength. So basically, what Maimonides opens up when he opens up his section on tshuva, what's tshuva? Tshuva means that I come through the same situation, very similar, and I hold back. Okay, so I'm going to take the most banal example of a diet. You know, if we break our diet because we cannot pass off vanilla ice cream with fudge on it, and then we promise that we're not going to eat it again, but we don't have it in the house. So as long as we don't have it in the house, it doesn't matter. But once someone brings it into the house, well, that's much more difficult to abstain. I'll say, oh, I'll just take a teeny little weeny bit. And then we end up eating the whole thing. And that is sin. Sin is the idea of, this is bad for me, I don't want to do this. It is only when a person can have a chocolate ice cream, fudge sitting in front of them, and it sits pretty and it's beautiful, and they go, you know what? I really do love you. I do love you, vanilla fudge, but I am committed not to eating this, and I will not eat this, and so I'm going to give this to someone else. That is overcoming your kind of challenge. And this is true for sins, because when a person sins, right? And then I'm talking about any sin. When a person sins, that's particularly when you sin against someone else, but when you sin, you've crossed a certain threshold. You've done something. It becomes a little bit part of you. You do have to let go of it. However, what I thought was very, very beautiful was the way Jonathan Sachs, Mr. Friend of Rafa, he broke it down, and he said that in ancient culture there was this idea that there's this idea of that a person is born with a certain character, and that is who they are. And also there's a certain destiny attached to a person because of where they were born under the stars, and that's who they will be, or that's what they're going to experience. Where in Judaism, the idea is that a person is born with free will, and what what defines this experience here on earth is choice, free choice. So we have free will and we have free choice, and therefore we can choose and we can change the trajectory of our experiences. We are not condemned to be a bad person. We do not have to be, even if we were in the past someone who had done wrong, we don't have to be that person anymore. We can repair ourselves. We can do tshuva through free will and free choice. We can become someone quite different. And so this is what Yosef was doing to his brothers. He said to his brothers, I know you think that you are marked by this experience, that this has to be the end of our family, that this has to be the end of the experience. But I see that you actually regret what you have done because of a virtue of your actions. You will not allow Benjamin to be sold, to be taken as a slave. Not only won't you allow him to be taken as a slave, you stand up in his stead to be the slave, especially Judah, who sold Joseph into slavery. And so I see you've passed the same experience, and this time you're behaving differently. And so we do have actually in this situation a very magnanimous Joseph who teaches us how we should deal with people who have hurt us, how we deal with pain, how we deal with betrayal. There is no greater betrayal than the betrayal of a brother selling you into slavery. And yet here, even here, Yosef was able to separate the action from his brothers. He was able to separate the experience from himself. And he did not characterize his brothers as those who sold me into slavery, but who acted that way. And what does he say? God sent me here. God is the one who put me here for your good. Now that may have made the brothers nervous too. And in a certain way, we know that the brothers actually were somewhat nervous that Yosef didn't really forgive them. And we see this at the end of the book of Bereshit, but when we get there, we're going to go into that. But now I would like to go into more of the mystical teaching of the Alter Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe talks about doing tshuva, and he talks also about what happens when you have a pain between you and someone else. Someone has hurt you and you're angry at them, okay? And then this is in chapter 12 of Tanya, and I'm just going to share that with you because it gives us a new paradigm on how to behave, okay? And I want to share that with you. Hold on. Okay, hold on. Let me just share this with you. Okay, this is chapter 12 of Tanya. And the Alter Rebbe, Reb Shneur Zalman Biadi, founder of Chabad Hasidism, says as following: so too should be in the matters between a man and his fellow man. Okay, he says, as soon as there arises from his heart to his mind any animosity or hate, God forbid, or jealousy, or anger, or a grudge, and they're like, he will bar them from his mind and will refuse even to think of them. On the contrary, his mind will prevail and dominate over his feelings of his heart to do the exact opposite of what his heart desires. Okay, how many times have we been told, just follow your gut, just follow your gut? Here, we're told, don't follow your gut, follow the mind, namely to conduct himself towards his fellow with the quality of kindness, as opposed to the quality of severity, where anger and hatred originate, and to display now watch this. This is really something special. And to display towards his fellow disproportionate love in suffering from him to the furthest extreme. Okay. All right. So the Tanya is telling us to have disproportionate love, especially when we're upset at someone, especially when we feel anger towards them. We should remove the anger as soon as we feel it. But we should, and not only that, we should have excessive love to that person without being provoked into anger, God forbid, or to take any revenge in kind, God forbid, even without anger. But on the contrary, to repay offenders with favors, as taught in the Zohar, that we should learn from the example of Yosef's conduct with his brothers when he repaid them for the suffering they brought upon him with kindness and favors. Okay. So this is a little excerpt of the Tanya, which really challenges us to go past, I would say, normal human behavior, and to say, when someone hurts us, we should not get angry at them, but rather we should have compassion on them, and we should feel, and we should be extra kind to them. Now, the question is, well, besides how can you do that, the question is, how does a person get there? I mean, how does a person go from being hurt by someone to having compassion for them? It's a very difficult trajectory to switch to. You're angry at someone hurt you, and now we're supposed to be like Yosef, says Tanya, and actually not let the anger sit in our heart. And then the question is, can we even control what comes into our heart? I mean, when someone hurts us, right? When someone hurts us, how is it that we can even not have that? It's visceral. You know, if you look at how the brain works, it's like it's automatic. There's, you know, when you put your finger on a fire, your brain is automatically going to feel pain, and the pain that people feel from being hurt is actual visceral pain. Like I mentioned in the past, there was a fascinating research that when people have pain, emotional pain from being hurt by someone, taking a painkiller like Tylenol or Advil actually helps them. So that the pain is real. It's not something that they can even control in a certain way. I thought it was fascinating that someone's in pain from something that was done to them. They're hurt, they're angry, they're upset, they're aggrieved, they're insulted. So they're not having physical pain, they're having emotional pain. Tylenol and Advil could help. That means that the pain that we feel emotionally actually gets translated into our body viscerally. And today, there's a whole genre in therapy where there's an understanding that trauma and pain leaves kind of an imprint on people physically. And so they do something called somatic therapy, where they actually address the body through touch and other means to calm the body down away from the actual pain that the body absorbs inside of itself. So there is no disconnect between the mind and the heart. It's seamless. So how does a person go about dealing with this kind of pain? And when you're hurt, how do you go about dealing with betrayal? And it's a visceral reaction. So what is the Tanya asking of us? It seems to be superhuman. And the Tanya doesn't say that this is the path of a tzaddik, even though it does mention Joseph a tzaddik. Rather, it posits that this is something that is possible for every single person. There are certain things that we say only righteous people can get to. But this, the Tanya says, yes, through a lot of hard work, even a simple person, a regular person, a normal person can achieve this. So the question is, what is the modality that we have to use when we are confronted with someone who betrayed us, someone who caused us pain, and we feel that hurt? How do we go from that visceral feeling, which we cannot stop actually, to not allowing this to fester and to going to the process of forgiveness? So the Tanya makes a distinction between all sin, by the way. So all thought, that when there is what we call an initial feeling or an initial thought that enters our consciousness. So for example, you know, sometimes someone could hurt us in a way that they can do something that we can literally feel that someone punched us in the gut. A person could say something that when we receive those words, you feel like you are attacked. You feel punched in the gut. So how do you cross the bridge from that initial pain and that initial anger, which is almost it's almost seamless. You almost cannot stop it. It's visceral. How do you cross that bridge into actually forgiving someone who has hurt you and betrayed you and who has crossed the line? And how do you cross the line back? So here, the Tanya gives a very practical guidance that there is a difference between, I guess, a subconscious or immediate or automatic response that our brain and a body will have towards either thoughts or feelings. There is this kind of, and depending on our predisposition and our makeup, everyone is made up differently. We'll have a different reaction, and it is going to be immediate. But the question is this: once a person has that initial reaction, can they stop the flow and stop it in its tracks? Can they stop the flow? And so here the Tanya posits that yes, that when a person is hurt initially, there may be an initial thought, an initial feeling, initial anger that a person cannot control very well. It's visceral, like I said. But once that has happened, what do you do with it? And that is a breeding ground for, you could make a simus out of that. You could really cook up a meal from it, because it's real and it's visceral and it's strong. And you could go and you could rant and you could rave and you could call your best friend. Do you know what happened? I am so angry and I am so frustrated. And that's normal. I mean, it's normal human behavior. But here we're talking about the ability to say, hold on a second. I feel this pain now. Let me stop it. Let me stop it and put it aside. Let me press the pause button and let me try to be cerebral about this and attack it from a different perspective and see if there is something more to the story, or if there's a way I can deal with this. And so one of the ways we can deal with this is, first of all, to stop and to say, at the very first, everything that happens to us, and this is a tough one, everything that happens to us from God. Ultimately, it was meant to be, right? The fact that this person was the one who caused you the pain is really more their problem than yours. But the pain you had to endure. That is the reality. And the Rebbe speaks about this in the Sikha, and the Rebbe says that there's a very famous saying in the Talmud that Rabbi Akiva taught, Koma avid drachmana latav avid. It's a saying in Aramaic that everything that the merciful one does is for our best. And even though we do not see the best in it at the time, there is a best into the story. Now, it may not be best for our body, it may be best for our soul. We don't always see the end of the story. Sometimes the end of the story seems to us like actually did not get the good end of the deal. We got the raw end of the deal. But there is this idea in the Talmud called Ma Da'avid Rahmana Latav Avid. Everything that God does is for our best. So when someone does something to us that's hurtful, we are in the receiving end of something that's hurtful. We have to say, okay, they did this to me, true, separate it, but God meant for me to go through this experience. Why? What do I have to learn from this experience? How can I become better from this experience? Sometimes it's simply not to do this to someone else. But what is it from this experience that I can glean? Because everything that God does is for the good. And it's a very, very high level of living. I'm going to grant you that. And it's an ongoing struggle. But the purpose actually of studying Torah, and the reason why I chose this aspect of Joseph's journey to study with us today is because the purpose of studying Torah is precisely to strengthen us in these facets of life, so that if we experience something, the natural thing to do is if someone hurts us is to become angry, to fester, and we don't take revenge, let's say, you're not allowed to take revenge, but to feel angry, to feel the hurt, and sometimes to wallow in it, and sometimes to wallow in it for a very long time. And sometimes, relationships get cut, people don't speak to each other after such things. So how do we overcome it? The way we overcome it simply is that we learn Torah. If we learn Torah often enough, and we have the messages of Torah often enough, so the day we learn this little, like today, that now that I'm discussing this with you and we're learning it together, I know that if something will happen to me later on today, no matter what, I just taught a whole beautiful teaching about the fact that everything comes from God. It's going to slow me down. It's going to impact me. There is no way I can learn this in the morning and behave differently in the afternoon. Certainly not teach this in the morning and behave differently in the afternoon. That is impossible, right? So the benefit of learning Torah and Hasidic thought specifically shed light on this kind of the human nature and the nature of sin and the nature of our souls, is simply because when we do this often and often enough, we have ammunition and we become refined in order to be able to deal with whatever it is that we're dealing better. So this is why I'm taking the opportunity, because even though we know the story of Joseph is the most known story, and we may even know all the lessons in the story. Nevertheless, it's important to review and to remember that there is a modality to dealing with disappointment, and it's found here. And if we know this, then at least for today, or maybe to the end of the week, you'll have the ammunition to say, if somebody hurt me, or if you're dealing with an old pain, to kind of let go and to forgive the person. And the first part is, number one, Koma the Avid Rahman Latav Avid, everything that God does is for the best. A famous teaching of Rabbi Akiva. And number two, sometimes we cannot see the best in the outcome, not always privileged to see it. Number two, and this takes a little bit more skill, is to have compassion on the person. And this is what the Alter Rebbe was saying, is to have compassion on the person who hurt you. When someone hurts us and we have compassion on them, what are we doing essentially? We're saying, oh my gosh, they struggle with something. They struggle with this aspect of their personality. And it's not them. Like I mentioned before, that the sinner and the sin is not one. So just like I separate myself from my own sin, and I should not become hard on myself for my own sin, and not call myself the Alti Rasha L'Tveiatzmacha, that I should not be evil in my own eyes, but know that I'm a good person. Because we say every morning in davening, Elahai neshama shenesata bi tahirahi, God, the soul that you endowed in me is pure. I was born good. We are not born in sin, not in the Jewish teachings. We're born good. We're born, babies are pure. We're born good. We're born with a clean slate. That's who we really are. We are that baby. That's our essence. Our essence is the baby that we are. In life, we will get dusty. We'll get dusty through our experience. We have to shake off the dust over that kind of makes us cynical and give up, and have compassion on ourselves, right? Say, this is not me. I did something. I have to correct it, but I am not my action. And the same has to be for someone else. When someone hurts us and someone betrays us, we have to separate the person from the act. And when we separate the person from the act, we say, this is a person who hurt us, but they are not their sin. They are separate from their sin. They are a good person who did something bad. Why? I don't know. They must be struggling with something that even I don't understand. And therefore we have compassion. And from compassion comes beneficence. And from there comes openness, and then even kindness to the person. And that is not letting go. It's not turning the other cheek. It's not absolving the person. It's really putting yourself in a situation where you separate the person from their action, and you say they're a good person who's done something not good. And for this, I have compassion for them, because I thank God I do not struggle with this trait. I remember sometimes someone called me once. They say they have a difficulty with someone who always loses their temper, and they can't respect them because this person always loses their temper. So I said to this person, listen, do you lose your temper like that? And this person said to me, no, I'm actually very proud that I'm a cerebral person. I'm an academic. I keep it together, and I have no respect whenever I see this person breaking down like that and losing their temper. And I don't like to be the subject of the lost temper. So I said, the next time the person gets angry at you, separate the person from the act and have compassion on them, because you don't suffer from a bad temper. You don't suffer from losing it. So have compassion, because this is a terrible thing to have to deal with. A person who is someone who loses their temper often, or who is someone who gets depressed, or someone who gets angry, or someone who drinks too much, or whatever it is, any of the vices that we're all endowed with at one point or another, be grateful that you don't have this struggle, and have compassion for the struggle that they do have. And then your heart opens up. It's not that you turn the other cheek, or you say, okay, I don't want to hear about it anymore. I let it go. Judaism doesn't say to let it go. Judaism says, open yourself up and see a soul who sinned, but the sin is not the soul. And the fact that this person is predicated or has tendencies in this area, have compassion for their weakness and forgive them, and at least have compassion. At least have compassion and have love. And then you'll see that your anger and your disappointment and the feeling of betrayal just melts away and it's not there anymore. And that's one of the great teachings that Yosef brings us. And that's something that as a Jewish people, we can do well to emulate. And may this bring peace amongst ourselves, in our families, in our communities, because, peace is the greatest element that we have in our homes and within our friendships. Without it, we are broken. There's in Hebrew, peace means whole. Shalom has the same etymology as wholeness. Wholeness is peace is whole. Because to be at peace is to be whole. So really, it's about not just letting go, but also having compassion. And then hopefully, this is something that will bring blessing in our lives. So I want to wish everyone a very
love them, Devorah.
Sorry?
We don't see it. So what Joseph started suddenly had a love for his brothers. We don't see it. I want to see exactly where is that forgiveness. Okay, so he saw that they made tshuva. So that means that when do we see exactly that he forgave them?
Well, first of all, in his behavior, he brings them close. He says, don't be scared. I don't want you to be hurt. You didn't hurt me. God made it happen. Don't feel bad. He reassures them. Imagine someone hurt you. Someone sold you into slavery. And then you meet them later and you say, and the person's so shocked to see you that you're in a position of power now. And you say, don't worry about it. I worked this through. I'm not angry at you. I saw every
forgiveness. That's when he forgives them.
Yes, he said, I'm not angry at you. He says it in this historic portion. He said, don't be afraid, don't be nervous. God sent me here. Yosef worked this through. He had 10 years in jail to think about it. He worked this through. He was not in a state of anger against his brothers. But he worked it through.
Why did not any of the brothers say, why did it have to take 22 years? Or did they just have belief in God, whatever he did was for, a purpose?
Sorry? Why did Joseph say that? Or why did who say that?
Why Joseph didn't connect?
Why did not any of the 10 brothers say to him, but why did it take you 22 years?
Well, the onus was on the sinner, not on the one who was betrayed. No, let me tell you something. When someone hurts you, right?
Yeah.
You have two options to do how you deal with it. You can let it sink you and let it become something that becomes your obsession. And unfortunately, that this happens with people often, unfortunately, because human beings are what human beings are. This is why, by the way, the study of Torah and the study of Chassidus is very important, because it bolsters us in face of our own human vulnerability. So the human tendency is to say, if someone hurts you, I hate you. You hurt me that bad, and you threw me in a pit. I hate you. If I see you, I'll kill you. Obviously. Or look, when they threw Yosef in the pit, they didn't even know that he would survive the journey down to Egypt. Essentially, they threw him to the wolves. So the onus was not on Yosef to reach out to them. No, that's Judaism does not turn the other cheek. That's my point. Yosef felt, let's separate the two things. From one perspective, Yosef was not angry at his brothers anymore because he felt that God put him in this place. He said, listen, I don't know why my brothers hate me so much. Maybe he looked at himself and said, maybe I did something to make them jealous of me. The Torah doesn't tell us the introspection that Yosef went through. It just tells us about his behavior. But one thing is clear from Yosef's words, not from what we think he said. From his words, he says clearly, you did not hurt me. God wanted me to go down to Egypt. It happens to be that you were just the messengers. So he's completely divorced himself from the act of his brothers. He saw their act as God doing it. And he wasn't angry at God because he said, God does everything for the best. I had to be in jail, so be it. But ultimately, when I came out of jail, look what I did. Not only for his family, but look what he did for Egypt. Look what he did for the Middle East at the time. He saved a civilization from mass hunger and death. So Joseph's actions are completely divorced from what his brothers did to him. That's part one. Part one is to say, I am not going to hold it again. I'm not going to bear a grudge. I'm not going to be angry at you. I see this as coming from God. But it was not his place to make his brothers do tshuva. Tshuva has to be done by us. You cannot force someone to do tshuva. What he did was when they came to him and he wanted to attach himself to them, he didn't want to undersell them without giving them the opportunity to do tshuva. When we give someone the opportunity to do tshuva, we're giving them a gift. I know when we have, my children were young, if they say something, let's say rude to a parent. So what do you say? You don't just turn the other cheek. If you turn the other cheek, you're leading your child down the wrong path. You don't take it personally. If a child behaves in a way that's chutzpahdik, let's say, disrespectful, you can't take it personally because this is your child talking. Your job is to be an educator. So what do? You say to the child, you can't talk this way to a mommy. It's disrespectful. Please say, I'm sorry. And the child will say, I'm sorry. This is giving the child the opportunity to recognize what they did wrong is part of the process of making a better person. So Yosef was behaving in that kind of cerebral educator path. He was saying, you need to, boys, I love you, but you need to walk through this. You have to figure out what you did wrong here for your own benefit. You have to fix this. I can't fix it for you, but I don't hold it against you. You see, there's a separation. It's not that Yosef put them through the fire and then said, okay, I humiliated you, now you're okay. Because we see that Yosef did not want to humiliate his brothers. In fact, that the language of the Torah says is Layis Apik Yosef. Yosef could not stand the fact that the Egyptians were watching this. He did not want to humiliate his brothers. So it was not personal for him, but he felt that for their own benefit, they would have to fix this. This is love. This is true love. And sometimes it's very difficult to do that to someone. It's better to say goodbye. I want nothing to do with you. Get out of my life. And that's it. When you say to a person, you did so and so, I want you to understand what you did so that you can fix it. That's the greatest gift you give to someone. But when you're doing it, you're not doing it out of anger. You're not saying, I'm angry at you. It's more like, I experienced this. It was all meant to be. But now, here's your opportunity to fix it, because I'm giving you a gift by allowing me to fix it. Because then this is not who you are anymore. It's just something that you did tshuva for, and it's no longer part of who you are. And that is the greatest gift we can give someone, not to allow things that happened to us or things that we did or things that other people did become part of who they are. It's a horrible thing to have the idea of shame that this is who you are. It's much better to have the opportunity to just say, you have to walk through the process, and it's not easy. It's much easier to just run away. This is true when we've hurt someone, and it's also true when someone has hurt us. It's easier to just walk away, write it off. Yosef does something which is exceptional. Yosef says to his brothers, you didn't hurt me. God did this. So I'm separating you from the act, but you have to do tshuva. And once they did tshuva, he gave them everything. He gave them a piece of land for their cattle. The choicest land, the choicest part of the land, the Goshen land, which is apparently was really very fertile, and a beautiful place to live. He gave them prime real estate. He filled their bags with food, and he gave them money, and he gave them presents. He was very, very kind to them. And this is the kindness that the Tanya is talking about, the kindness. But sometimes a person does have to repair what they did, not because you need it, because they need it.
But Devorah,
Yes.
maybe, this is so profound. Every time it's profound, but this is really profound.
Amazing.
Maybe the question about why did it take so long? Why did it take 20 years? Why? Maybe that, though, behind the backdrop is to say, this is hard and it takes time. We don't want to spend our whole life doing it. That's why it's so good to hear your words, to hear about what we could think about and be aware of. But don't think that after today we're going to leave, and this afternoon, now I'm going to make peace with everybody who, whatever ever happened, and hey, it's going to be terrific.
Right.
We wish for that, but it takes a lot of work, and the
Yes.
time is the symbol of the work.
Yes, and sometimes time, just the
Yes.
human nature being what it is, sometimes time has a way to clarifying things.
In the process of the time, if
Yes.
we hear these kinds of talks that you give us,
Yes,
study
Yes.
Torah, then we will maybe shorten the time, but don't think it's bim bam boom, everything fast,
oh,
fast.
it's, I don't think it's been.
I don't think you think so.
No, I'm saying that
No,
what you're saying is
I'm
very
talking-
profound, Monica. What you're saying is very profound, that
Yeah.
the time does give the permission for that work to get done.
That exactly.
And as long as, the focus is there, and I think that what this Torah portion does is it gives it that focus.
Exactly.
It gives it that focus, and we encounter the story, and then it makes us look at our own life. I know it's making me look at my own life.
Oh, yes.
You encounter the story and you say, hold on a second, where does this apply in my life? And how can I do something a little better going forward? And that is the beauty of applied Torah. It's not just learning Torah for esoteric purposes or for academic purposes, but it's to find real wisdom that helps us navigate the human experience. Because the Torah was written for human beings. It wasn't written for the angels. Like when the angels said, why are you giving the Torah to the Jewish people? They were upset with God. The Medrash tells us. They said, look how sinful they are. And the answer is yes, that precisely they're human and they need to have the Torah, but human is not bad. Human is just fallible. Human has the capacity to do good and not. We have free choice. So sometimes we're good, and sometimes we're not so good. And the goal is to become more good than not so good. That's the goal. The goal is to become more good than not. And it's step by step, and it's story by story. It's encounter by encounter. And hopefully this experience of Yosef and the beautiful teachings that our sages expound upon is something that can give us the ammunition to navigate the different journeys of our lives and the different interactions that we have, and specifically in the area of being magnanimous in forgiveness. And that is definitely a long it's a long work, but it should be present every day as much as we can make it present, and we will actually enjoy, or we will have much more joy, inner joy, when we can really get to that place that Yosef got to. It really is very liberating, and it really does bring us inner joy. And so my blessing to all of us is that the words that we study today should be something that we will put into our consciousness and hopefully apply to ourselves going forward, at least today or this week, and may it give us the strength to navigate the disagreements and the hurt in our lives in a better way.
Thank you.
Amen.
That's
May
really
I
beautiful.
ask
Thank
a
you. Yeah,
question?
but something, you know what, actually, I mean, listening to it's very inspiring, but I feel like in a way, our generation, right, in order for us to be able to accomplish something like that, we would have to be like, literally would put us spiritually higher than Joseph, even in a way, because Joseph had it revealed. So he had the dream, he saw the outcome. So we have to have faith in that, where, most people don't have that ability to see the good in the bad. And that just brings me to another question, which I don't even know if anyone really has an answer, but like for a family, I'm not referring about somebody else who, if they had a really tragic loss, for example. So that comes straight from Hashem. It's not like the third party there. So how do they, or what would you suggest for a person like that to be able to have forgiveness to God? Like, how do they forgive God? Because it's all in the good. It's all for the good is hard when let's say that person passed or whatever, right? So God forbid, but I'm just saying, like, it's like, I know it's a question probably nobody can answer, but how would you give advice for me to tell a person of what what they could do on
But
this journey.
could
Look,
I-
I think that when someone goes through a very difficult experience like that, the only thing we can do for them is just to be very compassionate to them, and to show a lot of pain, a lot of care for their pain, not to answer for God. The Rebbe once said, in response to some rabbis who gave reasons for the Holocaust, the Rebbe once said, the Rebbe did not like that fact that they gave reasons for the Holocaust. In other words, reasons why the Jews had deserved it. The Rebbe said, God does not need any lawyers. He can answer for himself. In other words, because we don't know the purpose of life, and we don't know the trajectory of the soul, it's not really our place to answer for God. We can't answer for God. If God takes away a person and it seems so unjustified, we cannot say, well, this is the reason why it happened. It was for better, it was for this. It's not our place to say it, because we're human beings and we don't know. We don't know the reason. All we know is that there's someone here with pain, and that pain is real, and we have to show compassion for the pain and do whatever we can to alleviate the pain with kindness and with love. That's it. That's all we can
Devorah,
do. That's
I'm
all we can
sorry.
do. Yes.
In Tehillim, when I'm reading, like at the beginning, before the chapter begins, like, the heading. So it says in one of them, I don't know offhand which chapter, but it says that we are sick because of our sins. If someone is sick and ill, it is because of their sins and they have to do teshuvah. Like when I read that, I mean, I know there's lots of different explanations, but when I read that, I found it very hurtful because, I mean, I know, like I lost my son, I mentioned, and it's like, what sins, I mean, he was 26, he was a good boy. What sins did he have? And it's not from the sins of his, is like me, my husband, his forefathers. So what sins? Why are we, I just read it and whenever I reread it, like, and I do it, like, it just hurts me to see that.
It's
What
a
explanation?
okay. So I would say that the reason there is an overarching theme that's as long as the world is imperfect, there's going to be pain and suffering, and the world is imperfect because of the whole structure of the world is set up that we sin. So, in other words, all suffering comes from sin. Our sins, when we say our sins, it doesn't mean ours individually. It means ours collectively as a civilization.
Okay.
It doesn't mean our specific sins. In the same way, Yom Kippur, where we say al chet and we hit our chest. Some of the sins that we say, first of all, we say it in the plural, al chet shechatanu lefanecha, for the sins that we have committed before you. So who is the plural? A person is reading this by themselves. So what's the plural? Secondly, some of the sins that we make confessions for, adultery, sexual impropriety, you bang your head and you're like, I never committed adultery, so what am I banging for? So the answer is that you're not only making tshuva for yourself, you're making tshuva for the world. There is in this world betrayal and adultery and lies and deception. This world is built. This world. The Talmud calls this world Olam HaSheker, the world of lies. This world is built on falsehoods. Look at who gets ahead and what is venerated. And it's not only this society. We say, oh, our society was better when they had the feudal systems with the kings, when they had serfs. It was never better. The world is a corrupt world. Our job is to make the world a better place. When we talk about our sins, we mean collectively. It does not, God forbid, mean that, God forbid, when someone has a suffering or a pain, that they are paying for a sin. Because only God knows I said, and then of course we have like you mentioned, the innocents, the good people. It's the overarching question of why good people suffer. We should not assign, God forbid, sin. This is one of the unsolvable questions, and I would say it's one of the constructs of the universe. The way it is that the world is an imperfect place. Our job is to bring perfection to the world, bit by bit by bit by bit. saying Tehillim recognizes God's presence, and that brings perfection to the world. But we cannot say that a specific person committed a specific sin, though there are some people that like to do that. I'm not going to say that there aren't some rabbis that like to do that, but I know that when you look at that, it's first of all, I remember one time I had a friend who was not raised in the Chabad tradition. I went to visit her, and one of her kids were like, he had a very high fever, and she's like, I think my baby has fever because I spoke Lashon Hara this week, or I forgot the sin that she put on herself. And I said to her, I started to laugh. I said to her, are you a saint? Are you a tzaddik? Do you think that you only righteous people only very, very righteous people get punishment in this world so that they should live, a pure life after? Most people, we live within the realm of nature, and divine providence has it that each one has their own trajectory. Why our soul goes through a certain path? This is something that nobody can answer. We can only see this from the perspective of someone who is not created. We are, by very virtue of being a created thing, even though we're human beings and we're extremely brilliant, we're still products of creation, and we still exist within the time-space continuum. And so we are not privy to certain realities and certain truths. So what we can do is, in the face of suffering, our response is to show compassion and to show kindness. And if a person is angry at God, that means that they believe in God. Elie Wiesel came to the Rebbe in the 1960s, and he told the Rebbe, he came from a Hasidic family. He told the Rebbe he had a hard time doing any mitzvahs because he said he was very angry with God for what happened to his family. And he said to the Rebbe, I don't believe anymore. I stopped being a believer because I'm very angry at God. And the Rebbe said to him, but the fact that you're angry at God is the biggest proof that you are a believer, because you believe in the goodness of God and you feel betrayed by him. You're the biggest believer, because you really believe that God runs the world and you're angry for what happened to you. Rather, what we have to do is we have to show a certain humility in the face of unknown. Just like, we are like an ant when it comes to knowledge of the universe. We think we know where we're going, and we think we know where we're digging, and we think we know, but we're really very small. I mean, we only have to go into an airplane. We don't have to go out to outer space. We just have to fly, get out of the city and just fly above the city and see how small everything becomes, to know how small we are. Yet, even in our smallness, God has given us the capacity to make the world a better place, to make ourselves we have free choice. We're not animals. We're not the contented cow that sits on the field, living out its days chewing grass. We're built for greater things. So yes, there's certain questions that I think there are no answers to, because by virtue of us being human, there cannot be an answer. Because if we had the answer, we'd be God. But our very humanness doesn't allow us to have the answer. It's impossible. How can we understand something that's outside of the capacity of which we were created? We're created within time and within space and within matter. And we're talking about ideas that are out of time, out of space, out of matter. We don't even have an inkling of what is the nature of the universe, the purpose of the universe. And why is there a world altogether? Why does there have to be a world? Why did God create a world? There's so much pain in this world. Why was this world even created? And if you look at it from the cosmos, the Earth is just a little dot in the cosmos. This infinite universe. We don't even understand what this universe is. So what we have to have is humility in the face of that kind of tragedy. But from the perspective of a human being, what do we have to have? Compassion and kindness and goodness. And our sages tell us, the world is built through kindness. This is how we build the worlds. So our response is to have kindness and compassion, and to be as good as we can, and as giving and as embracing to the people that have suffered this loss, and not to provide answers, and let God answer for them. And just to say, we don't know, and it's okay that they have pain. And the fact that they have so much pain is and so much anger, if I would, against God, is a sign that they do believe in God. And so that's something that has to be recognized and embraced. Rather, they should focus on what they can do for the neshama and what they can do to continue this person's legacy on earth by establishing either a charity in their name or doing good deeds in their name. And this way the person lives on, if not physically, spiritually, because ultimately all of us here are just souls in a body for a limited amount of time. And then we leave this earth. And where do we go? We live in our souls are part of a much greater, a much greater universe of understanding that we don't really fully comprehend in our limited existence here on earth. So our job here is to do kindness, to show compassion, to try to be connected to God, and not necessarily to understand, because not everything, we all will come to a point that there will be a brick wall that we can't understand past, because that is the limitations of the human construct. We're really, really smart. We figure out a lot of things, but certain things are outside of our understanding. And the reason why a soul comes down here on earth for a short period of time, suffers, who knows why? This is beyond us. It really is. And I think that the humility that we have to have in the face of that, bow our heads and say, we don't know everything. But what do we have to do? Let's be kind, and let's surround that person with love. And that's the best that we can do.
Always
Thank you
beautiful.
Thank you for your time.
Beautiful
Deborah.
word, beautiful teaching. Thank you.
I hope it brings some kind of comfort.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Just a quick question. After we pass, does God reveal the answers to our questions?
So that's a good question.
Yeah.
And we're told that there's an awareness that the soul has. The Kabbalistic teachings write about this, that there's an awareness that the soul has after he passes. In fact, once the Rebbe did say that if we would ask the victims of the Holocaust about their experience, they may surprise us with what they have to answer. In other words, we see everything bottom up, but there's another way of looking through the world. So there is an awareness that the soul does glean after it leaves the body. The body is the greatest vehicle for the soul to do good, but it also restricts the soul from understanding that which is not physical. Because by virtue of being in a physical body, we are connected to the physicality of the body. So on that note, let's have everyone a blessed week, and Besura Tovot. It should be good news. It should only be blessings that we love. And for those that we don't love, let's work on that so that we love them a little bit more.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful week. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.